Hello and welcome to our webinar which is broadcast every Thursday at 11 a.m. Today's topic is condition affecting the detector installation according to EN 5440. Our contents today: detector mounting on flat sailings, effect of sailing irregularities on detector mounting, detector installation in suspended sailings, detector installation on race, smoke cloud accumulation below sailing, effect of walls or partitions on detector mounting, detector installation in ventilation channels, effect of airflow on detector mounting, detector mounting on flat sailings. Previous standard was saying that sensitive elements of detectors should not be installed 10 mm below the sailing. For the smoke detectors, 150 mm below the sailing. EN 5414 is a general requirement about underflat horizontal sailings. In general, the performance of heat or smoke detectors depends on the presence of sailing above the detectors. For this reason, detectors should be placed so that the sensitive elements are 25 mm below the sailing and at the top 10% of the room height. Also, detectors should not be installed 600 mm below the sailing. For smoke detectors, 150 mm below the sailing. For heat detectors, sometimes the sailing to be mounted does not have a flat appearance. In this case, detectors should be mounted within the upper 5% of the room height. In sailing with beams, if the beam height is less than 5% of the sailing height, the sailing should be considered flat and radius limits applied. 6.5.1 General regulation is about the sailing irregularities which is less than 10 mm. Irregular sailings with a depth of less than 10% of the sailing height should be treated as if they were flat and radius limits of 6.5.2 should be applied. As shown in figure, capital D is the distance between the beams measured from outside to outside, and its unit is meter. Capital H is the sailing height, and its unit is meter. Lowercase h is the depth of the beam, and its unit is meter. Any sailing irregularity, such as beam, with a depth of more than 10% of the sailing height should be considered a wall, and following condition will apply. If capital D is greater than 0.25%, detector should be in every cell as you see on the screen. If capital D is less than the solution of capital H minus lowercase h multiplied by 0.25. Two detectors for each cell. If capital D is less than the solution of capital H minus lowercase h multiplied by 0.13, three detectors for each cell. In here, we will see the previous regulation of how mounting should be done in inclined sailings, like the figures shown. If the ratio of lowercase h to capital H is less than 5%, the sailing is considered flat, and detectors are mounted according to the detection radius values. If the ratio of lowercase h and capital H is greater than 5%, the sailing is considered inclined, and the detectors are installed by increasing the detection radius values by 1% for each degree of sailing slope. It should be noted that detection radius values can be increased up to a maximum of 25%. In here, we will see the current situation of how mounting should be done in inclined sailings, like the figures shown. If the protected area has a pitch roof, detectors should be placed at each vertex. If the height difference between the bottom of the sloping sailing and the top of the hill is less than 6 cm, the roof is treated as flat if smoke detectors are used. If the difference between the highest point and the lower point of the sloping sailing is greater than 6 cm, the sailing is considered to be inclined, and The detectors are installed by increasing the radius values 1% for each degree of sailing slope. Radius values can be increased up to a maximum of 25%, as I said. Well, how is the detection done in the spaces above the suspended sailings? If there is a risk of fire on the suspended sailing, fire detectors, at least one in each independent place, should be mounted on the suspended sailing. In cases where the cable in suspended sailing are fire resistant, if the flammability of the cables at any point exceeds 25 millijoule, a detector is used in the suspended sailing. In cases where the cables are not fire resistant, if the flammability amount exceeds 15 millijoule, a detector is used in the suspended sailing. Let's talk about areas that do not need to be protected. Voids need to be protected with detectors only if there is likely to be a large spread of fire or smoke outside the relevant space before the fire detected by detectors outside the space. And if a cavity is likely to damage the emergency system wiring before the fire is detected. How does it apply to walls, partitions, and obstacles? Detectors should not be mounted closer than 50 cm from any wall or partition. If the room is narrower than 1 meter, the detector can be applied to the center of the width or should be mounted close to its center. Where rooms are divided into sections by walls, partitions or shelves that extend up to 30 cm to the ceiling, the sections should be considered as reaching the ceiling and each section should be considered as a separate room. A gap of at least 50 cm should be left in all directions under each detector. The dimensions of such a hole must be compatible with the particular detectors in accordance with the manufacturer instructions. Let's examine how detectors are used for air ducts. Air duct smoke detectors must comply with EN 5427. To avoid the effects of air turbulence, smoke detectors or props should be installed in straight duct extension, nearest bend, corner, or at a distance of up to 3 times with the width of the joint, as you see on the screen. Particular attention should be paid to the effects of airflow on the detector if the detector is placed within 1 meter of any air intake, or in an area with airflow greater than 1 meter per second. The current status of ventilation and air movement is as follows. Point type detectors should not be installed within 0.5 of any high velocity weather grill where the air velocity is greater than 0.5 meter per second. Let's talk about the importance of identification. The control and identification equipment may have the ability to individually recognize the detector or alarm button that the alarm is given. In this case, a method should be provided to ensure that the indicator of the control and indicating equipment is associated with the relevant detector. If detector tags are used to provide the necessary cross-relationship between detectors, alarm buttons, and control and indicating equipment, identification numbers or letters must be added or adjuncted to detectors and call points that reproduce the indications provided on the controller. Thank you for your participation, and if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask us at the above email address.